In a small corner of a playground, at the age of 4, Danielle and Andrew made a naive promise, an oath no one could have predicted would forever alter their lives. What began as a simple childhood friendship gradually blossomed into a love story that weathered every obstacle in its path. Yet one question lingered: is love really enough? When Andrew knelt down at the very spot where they first met and proposed, their future appeared set for a storybook conclusion. But life seldom follows a fairy tale script. As they stepped into marriage, Danielle and Andrew soon realized that love alone could not erase the deep differences between the worlds they'd each come from. Danielle was a young woman raised in a vibrant, close-knit neighborhood brimming with communal warmth, while Andrew came from a traditional family bound by age-old values and unspoken rules. Their differing backgrounds brought conflicts neither had foreseen. Could their love stand firm in the face of so many challenges? Or would the gulf between their two realities become an unbridgeable chasm? Have you ever wondered if love can transform not just two people, but an entire community? Join us in exploring this heartwarming story, a tale not just about romance, but about sacrifice, empathy, and the power of understanding. Subscribe now so you don't miss out on stories that speak to the heart. A March evening in Atlanta draped the city in low-hanging clouds, a hint of imminent rain hovering in the heavy, damp breeze. The weak glow of streetlights threw a golden haze across the pavement, revealing every crack in a neighborhood fiercely resisting the passage of time. This was Danielle's home, maybe not a glossy showpiece, but a place brimming with memories. To her, it was everything. Rows of brick houses lined the narrow streets, their facades chipped and their faded paint reminiscent of battles against years of neglect. At the corner, a handful of kids entertained themselves by kicking a beat-up plastic ball, the hollow thunk echoing into the night. Their carefree voices held a kind of innocence adulthood often robs. Nearby, a middle-aged black man sat hunched on his porch, cigarette between his fingers, eyes distant with memories of days that might have been better. It was the first time Andrew's family visited Danielle's neighborhood. Their glossy SUV halted along the curb, headlights washing over the brick walls and vibrant graffiti scrawled across them, words like freedom and we belong, bold proclamations of both defiance and affirmation. As the car door swung open, Andrew's mother, Margaret, stepped out, wearing a neatly tailored trench coat and polished heels. She paused, surveying the peeling paint and scuffed sidewalks with a mixture of curiosity and something like discomfort. Margaret took one small, subtle step, perhaps to avoid dust on her shoes, and then murmured softly to Andrew's father, "Gregory, I had no idea Danielle lived somewhere like this. It's difficult to believe." Standing only a few feet away, Danielle froze at the softly spoken words, an invisible blade slicing through the fragile armor she'd spent years forging against such judgments. She felt that old, familiar sting. It's happening again. She'd seen those wary glances her entire life, on the streets, in classrooms, and sometimes even among neighbors who, ironically, also struggled. But hearing such skepticism from the parents of the man she loved cut deeper. She looked at her sneakers, freshly cleaned. She thought, though they paled beside Margaret's immaculate footwear, "I'll never be enough, will I?" Steeling herself, Danielle forced a smile and tugged on Andrew's hand. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Let's just go inside." Margaret offered a constrained smile in return, but her critical gaze wandered over the setting. Children hollering on the corner, old cars rusting at the curb, bold neon scrawls of graffiti. A child's ball rolled near Margaret's feet, and a little girl raced over to retrieve it. Margaret reflexively took a step back, as though startled. Danielle's cheeks burned with embarrassment, though she fought to keep her expression neutral. When they finally entered Danielle's home, a modest but inviting space, warm scents of her mother's fresh bread filled the air, mingling with a vase of carnations Harriet, Danielle's mother, had arranged on a worn wooden table. The living room boasted a comfy, if slightly tattered, sofa and a few personal touches, such as framed sketches Danielle had drawn, one of a local basketball court at sunset, and another of two clasped hands, one light, one dark, against a sandy beach. Yet in this cozy milieu, Danielle couldn't dispel the weight pressing upon her. She noticed Margaret's posture stiffen, her eyes gliding across every seam and scratch. Across the table, Andrew tried light-hearted conversation. "Mom, do you know Danielle once beat me at basketball behind her house? She's an amazing shot. Wait till you see the painting she did of that place." Margaret nodded, her smile thinning. "Interesting. You've always been open to new experiences." Andrew. Her tone had the timbre of ice clinking in a glass, controlled, but cold. Just then, Danielle's father, Jason, walked in. He greeted Gregory with a firm handshake. The men exchanged polite nods, communicating a recognition of each other's stake in the situation. Danielle caught Andrew's eye and offered a tight smile. They both knew this wasn't just an ordinary dinner. It was the opening skirmish in a battle for acceptance. In the small kitchen, Danielle had prepared everything meticulously, hoping the meal might become a bridge between the two families. Yet from the outset, an uncomfortable air clung to the proceedings. On the table sat a golden honey-roasted chicken, black bean rice, and crisp corn fritters Danielle had made herself. Overhead lighting bathed the scene in gentle warmth, but it failed to lighten the tension throbbing in the room. Seated next to Danielle, Harriet tried to maintain a hospitable smile, but her watchful eyes flickered guardedly toward Margaret. Jason, across the table, stayed mostly silent, radiating a protective wariness. Opposite them sat Margaret, outwardly cordial but brimming with silent judgments, and Gregory, whose strained attempts to look relaxed only deepened the unease. Andrew, squeezed in beside Danielle, silently signaled support through warm squeezes of her hand under the table. Yet Danielle couldn't shake the sensation that each second was thick with unspoken critiques. Margaret cut into her portion of roast chicken. She chewed slowly, then looked at Danielle. "This tastes nice. Did you learn to cook it from your mother?" The question seemed innocuous, but Danielle sensed the unvoiced subtext. "I'm surprised it's edible." Her cheeks heated, but she forced another polite nod. "Yes, ma'am. This is something we eat a lot at home on the weekends." "Ah, back in our neighborhood," Margaret said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "We usually have traditional roast beef." "Andrew, dear, I recall you loved that, didn't you?" The dagger was subtle, but sharp enough for Danielle to feel its tip. From the corner of her eye, Harriet set her fork down carefully, and Jason's jaw tightened. Sensing mounting tension, Andrew tried to break the moment with a laugh. "Mom, trust me, Danielle's version is just as good as anything I've had. After all, I grew up on your cooking." He shot Danielle a slightly panicked smile, hoping it might defuse the moment. Margaret's mouth curled. One could call it a smile, but it lacked warmth. "Yes, dear, you always did have an adventurous palate." She reached for her water glass, letting a pregnant pause dangle. Then, with calculated concern, she said, "Danielle, your parents must have worked incredibly hard to help you attend college, right? Given well, the neighborhood and all that." Danielle heard the challenge, plain and direct this time, like a spotlight exposing her entire family's struggles. "They don't see who I am, only how I made it out." The tightness in Danielle's chest intensified. She felt Harriet's reassuring hand cover her own. Jason's eyes flickered with protective anger. "Yes," Danielle answered, carefully measured. "My parents worked hard, just as many here do. It wasn't easy, but they never called that hardship. It's family responsibility. They're proud of me." Jason's voice cut in, firm but calm. "We don't consider what we did a burden. Margaret, our daughter's accomplishments are our pride." Margaret appeared unsettled by Jason's unwavering stare. She broke eye contact, taking a delicate sip of water. Andrew clenched his fists under the table, an undercurrent of anger swirling. His father, Gregory, glanced at him, as though quietly apologizing for the unsubtle remarks. Yet Gregory, too, remained passive. Just then, Margaret pivoted the conversation to a question that had haunted Danielle for months. "Danielle, be honest. Aren't you worried about future children? Don't you think it'll be difficult for them? Being biracial? They might be hurt by society's narrow views." At that moment, Danielle felt as though the wind had been knocked from her lungs. Already worried about children we don't have? The world around her froze. Our kids won't even be safe in their minds. Her voice shook with quiet outrage. They won't be hurt by their skin color, she managed, but by this world full of people who can't look beyond it. Silence descended. Harriet's eyes glistened with tears of pride for her daughter's stand, while Jason's jaw tensed. Andrew nearly snarled in frustration, turning to his mother. "Mom, that question is—" But Danielle stood, her voice wobbling yet firm. "Excuse me." She didn't wait for a response. Pushing away from the table, the scrape of the chair's legs grated against the hush in the room. As she left, Margaret looked stunned, possibly aware now of just how deep her words had cut. Harriet closed her eyes briefly, a tear rolling down her cheek that she quickly brushed aside. Jason set his utensils aside with deliberate composure. He glanced at Margaret and said quietly, "Sometimes the things we say in curiosity hurt more than we can imagine." Gregory looked at his wife, disapproval in his eyes. "Margaret, this is not the way to get to know someone who matters to Andrew." Andrew shot to his feet, staring bleakly at his mother. He left without another word. The atmosphere, choking, heavy, was left behind in that little dining room. Outside, Danielle felt the cool air on her cheeks. She slid onto the porch step, trying to dispel the suffocating rush of tears. The silent street offered none of the comfort she craved, only time and space to replay every loaded comment. Moments later, Andrew appeared behind her. He Saturday leaving a respectful gap, aware that she might still be raw from the confrontation. "I'm sorry," he said, voice laced with guilt. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I've faced these stares, these words, my whole life. But from your family? I just don't know what to do." Andrew gently encircled her in his arms. "I can't change everything, but I can promise I'll stand with you, no matter what." Leaning into him, Danielle wanted to believe that promise with all her heart, but an ache lingered in her chest. Will love be enough? Their world was about to grow more complex. The tensions between Danielle and Andrew's parents were only the beginning. Moments of friction became more frequent. Margaret insisted that Andrew think carefully before committing to an engagement. Danielle's father, Jason, grew increasingly wary of how Andrew's family might treat his daughter. Harriet, though gentler, couldn't hide her sadness at Danielle's confusion. Through it all, Andrew's silent guilt grew. While he staunchly defended Danielle, he wrestled privately with the fear of losing the closeness he once shared with his parents. It reached a head one afternoon when Andrew decided to confront his mother at home. He found her in the living room, perched in her favorite armchair, scrolling distractedly on her phone. The early evening light captured the tension on her face. "Mom," he began, voice shaking with pent-up frustration. "I'm begging you, give Danielle a fair chance. See who she is, not who you assume her to be." Margaret set her phone aside, folded her hands in her lap. She regarded Andrew for a long moment before responding, "Andrew, there are realities you can't ignore. A woman from that neighborhood, her background can't just vanish." Andrew flinched, anger flaring. "You think her background is a problem? She's strong, talented, and honest. Isn't that what matters?" Margaret gave a weary sigh. "Love is fragile. Andrew, one day, she might not be able to bear this life, and you'll be the one to suffer." He rose abruptly, his voice carrying heartbreak as well as rage. "If you think you're protecting me, you're wrong. You're driving me away. I love Danielle, and if you can't accept that, I might have to step back from you, too." Shock flickered across Margaret's face, her jaw tightening. She'd never seen Andrew so resolute. "Andrew," she began, but he was already leaving. "I can't let you push her aside," he said, a final vow echoing down the hallway. Later that day, Andrew trudged back into his apartment. Danielle was by the window, eyes distant. He recounted the confrontation, finishing with, "I threatened to walk away from them if they keep pushing this." Her lips trembled. "I never wanted to break you from your parents. I hate that you feel you have to choose." He sagged, leaning on the counter. "I know, but their refusal to see the real you. It's suffocating. She crossed over and wrapped her arms around him. I just need to know we're still together in this. He stroked her hair. We are. The next afternoon, tragedy struck the neighborhood. Danielle witnessed it firsthand, stepping out and seeing a crowd gathered around a small figure lying motionless on the pavement. That figure was Jamal, a young boy who often played basketball in the street, known for his shining eyes and infectious laugh. A cry tore through the crowd. An officer's patrol car stood nearby, red and blue lights pulsing. The officer claimed Jamal had acted threateningly, but Danielle and everyone else knew the kid was unarmed, brandishing nothing but a basketball. The street buzzed with shock, grief, and anger. He was just a child. Returning home, Danielle trembled with tears, her face pale. Andrew rushed over, concern etched on his face. What happened? She shook, her voice a rasp. Jamal, he's dead. Shot by a police officer. He was only 12. Andrew's face dropped. How? Why? Because this world doesn't care about certain lives. Andrew, it just doesn't, she hissed, bitterness lacing her words. She headed onto the balcony, tears free-flowing. Andrew joined her, unsure how to console the grief that hammered in her chest. The incident became a lightning rod for the community's pent-up frustrations. Jamal's vigil drew crowds that blocked the street. Flowers, candles, and basketballs were laid in tribute. But sorrow boiled into anger. They organized a protest march to the local precinct, demanding accountability. Danielle led the charge, brandishing a sign reading, "Justice for Jamal." As they marched, voices grew stronger. Justice for Jamal. Justice now. Tensions were high. Officers formed a defensive line at the precinct entrance. The crowd chanted, some pushing forward. Fury unleashed. Danielle felt anger surge in her veins. Suddenly, Andrew emerged in the throng. Danielle's eyes widened. He was an outsider here, or so the others thought. One neighbor, Tyrone, blocked him. What are you doing here? This isn't your fight. Andrew stood firm, meeting Tyrone's glare. It's Danielle's fight. That makes it mine too. He spotted Danielle, and in her tearful, determined gaze, he saw relief that he'd come. When someone shoved Danielle, Andrew interposed himself. Stop, he shouted. Arms spread. She's done nothing wrong. Phones captured every second. The protest could have become a riot, but Andrew's bold, visible defense of Danielle gave the crowd a moment's pause. The tension eased, if only slightly. The clip of Andrew shielding Danielle went viral. Headlines read, "Man shields fiancée at protest demanding justice for child killed by police." Social media buzzed with admiration. He's protecting her, even though he's not from her community. The coverage galvanized more people to join in subsequent marches. Yet not all feedback was supportive. Some ridiculed Andrew for meddling in a fight not his own, while others questioned whether it was merely performative. But for Danielle, it was a lifeline of hope. Every second that Andrew stood with her, there was proof that love could transcend dividing lines. Meanwhile, Margaret watched the news coverage in disbelief. She replayed the footage again and again, focusing on Andrew's protective stance. The eyes of her son burned with a fierceness she'd never before witnessed. As she sat alone in the living room, phone in hand, she whispered, "Am I really losing him? Have I misunderstood everything?" Gregory, passing by, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's time you truly meet Danielle," he suggested. "Not to judge, but to understand." Margaret nodded, swallowing the pride that had kept her distant. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it." That evening, Andrew received a phone call from his mother. "I'd like to meet Danielle," Margaret said, words clipped but sincere. "Privately, I want to talk to her." Andrew hesitated, but told Danielle. Though anxious, Danielle agreed. She felt it might be her one shot at bridging the chasm between them. The meeting took place in a cozy downtown cafe, floor-to-ceiling windows let in gentle morning light. Danielle arrived first, heart pounding, wearing a simple dress. Margaret joined her soon after, posture impeccable, eyes searching. They sat across from each other. the warmth of coffee aroma at odds with the cold tension between them. Margaret sipped her coffee, already lukewarm, then set the cup down with precise care. She looked Danielle in the eye. "I wanted to speak to you about Andrew," Margaret said, voice carefully controlled. "I think we both know things have grown complicated." Danielle nodded, offering no illusions. "Yes, they have." Margaret inhaled. "Andrew is a good man, but he's being pulled into struggles he never faced before. If you truly care for him, you should think about letting him go. Spare him a life of pain." Danielle's chest tightened, but she summoned her composure. It was not the first time someone implied she wasn't good enough for Andrew, but hearing it so bluntly from his own mother still stung. "You think I'll hurt him? Do you understand what he wants? Andrew believes in me. He chose me." Margaret's expression flickered, possibly registering the steadiness in Danielle's voice. Choosing someone and living happily ever after are two different things. Danielle leaned forward, voice unwavering. "I'm not naive about love. I know it doesn't magically erase prejudice or struggles, but that doesn't mean we should walk away. Andrew and I are determined to face these things together. I'm not just from that neighborhood. I'm a woman who has fought for everything she has." A hush fell between them. Margaret's eyes narrowed, as though reevaluating. "You're stronger than I expected, but love can't survive on strength alone." Danielle nodded. "It can't. It needs empathy, understanding, a willingness to learn from each other. Andrew and I are doing that. I hope you can, too." Margaret stared at her, unsure how to respond. Finally, she looked away, murmuring, "I don't hate you, Danielle, but I'm scared for Andrew." And with that, she stood up. "I need time to think." She left, leaving Danielle quietly exhaling, a swirl of relief and lingering anxiety filling her chest. Meeting Margaret sparked a new sense of resolve in Danielle. She channeled her swirling emotions back into her art. But she also recognized that the neighborhood needed more than just personal growth. They needed healing. If only there was a way to unify everyone, to share who we really are. The idea struck her, a large, public mural capturing the neighborhood's struggles and its hopes. Across from the modest red brick houses stood a long, barren wall, pockmarked with cracks. She envisioned the wall as a canvas, a chance to show the stories of Jamal, the children, and the community's resilience. Approaching Tyrone and Nicole Howard, the friend who had valiantly led local gatherings, Danielle pitched the plan. "We need to show people what we stand for," she said. "Not just protest for a day, but create something lasting." Tyrone, a neighborhood mechanic who'd had his own battles with law enforcement, hesitated, arms folded. "You sure nobody'll tear it down or deface it?" Nicole offered a gentle smile. "We can't be silent. A mural could say what words can't." Days later, Danielle stood in front of that empty wall, roller in one hand, paint in the other, flanked by Andrew, Tyrone, Nicole, and a cluster of neighborhood kids. On that first morning, they laid out base coats. Children giggled, excited to do grown-up things with brushes. Some passers-by slowed, curious but uncertain. A sense of possibility crackled in the air. Every day, the mural took shape. One section depicted Jamal, beaming and full of life, basketball in hand. Another portion showcased families from the neighborhood, wearing everyday expressions of both hardship and hope. Danielle spent long hours perfecting the centerpiece. Two clasped hands, one light-skinned, one dark, symbolizing the unity she believed in. Andrew joined with surprising enthusiasm. He wasn't an artist, but he followed Danielle's instructions meticulously, mixing paint shades, carefully tracing outlines. "Never thought I'd hold a brush like this," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. Then came a phone call from Margaret. "Andrew, I heard you're helping with some wall painting," she said. "Is that wise?" He paused. "It's important to Danielle," he answered simply, "and to me." Margaret sighed on the line, but didn't forbid him. "Just remember, life is complicated." The mural evolved rapidly. By day 5, bright colors and heartfelt images were transforming the once neglected wall into a communal masterpiece. Jamal's face was nearly finished, radiant with swirling blues and yellows. The words, "harmony isn't about erasing differences. It's about learning to love them," were planned to arc above him in bold letters. Local news outlets started reporting on the effort. A short human interest clip featured Danielle, paint-splattered and determined, explaining why this project mattered. Nicole addressed the camera with heartfelt urgency. "After losing Jamal, we needed a way to express ourselves. This is about healing, about reminding the world that every child here matters." The community galvanized around the effort. One family donated extra cans of paint, while older neighbors sat by with cups of lemonade, shouting the occasional "looks good" at the painters. Police presence also shifted. Officer Tyler who patrolled the area, had quietly made sure the project was protected. After what happened to Jamal, tension with police still burned, but the mural gave a faint glimmer of collaboration. Andrew noticed Harriet and Jason passing by on the fourth evening. They paused, watching Danielle paint. Harriet had tears in her eyes, as if proud to see her daughter leading something so meaningful. Jason offered Andrew a nod, a sign of grudging respect. As word spread, more participants arrived with paintbrushes, markers, and stories. Day after day, the mural grew into an expansive tapestry, a starry sky representing children's dreams, flowers rising from cracks in the concrete to signify rebirth, and quotes from local residents. Danielle deftly tied it all together with swirling strokes of color. Andrew backed her up every step, helping younger kids, cleaning up spills, even welcoming the occasional reporter. One afternoon, a small boy named Brandon, no more than 7, tugged at Danielle's sleeve. He wanted to write something beneath Jamal's portrait. She handed him a brush, watched him carefully paint the words, "Love is the only way we survive." Danielle fought tears. His simple phrase said everything. Philip, a middle-aged man who'd lost a family member to violence, painted a flickering flame to represent perseverance. "It's not about burning," he said, voice thick with emotion. "It's about lighting the path." Even kids from across the city dropped by, painting stars and doves. It became clear that the mural was no longer just about Jamal or the immediate neighborhood. It was a rallying point for anyone who had ever been unseen, who had faced discrimination, who wanted unity. Margaret felt compelled to see it for herself. After a few days of reflection, and spurred by Andrew's unwavering involvement, she arrived, paintbrush in hand, surprising everyone. Andrew noticed her first, standing near the curb with an air of uncertainty. She offered a tentative smile, no trace of condescension this time. Walking toward the half-finished mural, she paused at Jamal's face. His young eyes seemed to stare back. For a moment, Margaret's composure wavered. She swallowed, tears threatening. He was just a child. Turning to Danielle, who stood guarded a few steps away, Margaret said softly, "This is important, isn't it?" Danielle nodded, not quite hiding her shock at Margaret's presence. "Yes, very important." Margaret reached into her bag, pulling out a brush of her own. "Teach me what to do." A hush fell on the group. Then applause erupted, tentative at first, swelling as they recognized the significance of her gesture. Margaret moved to an empty patch of wall, hand trembling slightly. She painted a sentence, "Love doesn't choose color, it chooses the heart." Danielle's throat tightened at those words. Andrew's eyes flickered with gratitude toward his mother. She turned, brushing a tear aside. "Danielle," Margaret said, voice unsteady, "I can't undo all my mistakes, but I'd like to start here." Over the following week, the mural neared completion. News stations featured the transformation, from an abandoned wall to a brilliant display of defiance and hope. The once dusty street corner bustled with neighborly chatter, newly planted flowers, and a sense of genuine pride. The final day of painting drew a celebratory crowd. A local radio station even played music while folks helped. Harriet and Jason contributed a corner with a heartfelt dedication, "In memory of all we've lost, in honor of what we can become." The children finished painting a rainbow of stars around the top, each representing a dream for the future. The largest moment arrived when Danielle and Andrew retouched the clasped hands at the mural's center. Danielle insisted on enlarging them, because unity should be bigger than any prejudice, she explained. After the last brushstroke, everyone stood back to admire it under the slanting rays of the late afternoon sun. Nicole Howard addressed the gathering. Look at this wall. It's not just paint. It's us. All of us. Our voices. Our stories. Applause answered her. Tyrone, once cynical, nodded in agreement. We can't be silent anymore. This is proof we exist. And we matter. Margaret lingered at the base of the wall, reading every quote, face thoughtful. At last, she turned to Danielle. I never realized how much you all had to say. Her eyes flicked to Andrew. And how much Andrew believed in you. Danielle smiled, tears glistening. I never realized you could try to see us, too. Thank you. As twilight settled, the party-like energy dissipated. People began to leave, heading to their homes with paint-stained clothes and satisfied smiles. Danielle and Andrew lingered. It's so beautiful, Danielle murmured, gazing at Jamal's face. We've given him a voice that can't be silenced. Andrew slipped an arm around her shoulders. It's not just his voice. It's ours. It's the neighborhood's. It's my mom's. Your dad's, everyone. Danielle laid her head on his shoulder, exhaustion seeping in, yet buoyed by a deep sense of accomplishment. Do you think it'll always stand? Andrew exhaled. I want to believe that. Yes, even if it gets defaced, we'll restore it again. They can't destroy our spirit. But hate often festers in the dark. Late that night, under the sickly glow of a single street lamp, a group of hooded figures emerged at the far end of the block. Their leader carried a metal rod. The others clutched spray paint cans. The metallic rattling of the cans announced their intent. They advanced on the mural with grim determination. The leader sneered at Jamal's portrait. They think a painting changes anything? Let's show 'em. Without hesitation, black paint hissed across the smiling face. Another figure scrawled hateful words. Leave now. Another hammered the center of the wall with the rod, cracking the carefully painted clasped hands. Harsh, mocking laughter filled the silent street as they scrawled, "No place for this here," in slanted letters. When they disappeared again into the shadows, the mural lay in ruins, huge sections chipped off, hateful graffiti covering images. Once bright colors slashed into chaos. A savage message left behind for the neighborhood to find at dawn. The morning sun revealed the extent of the destruction. Danielle, heading there with a bag of paints, glimpsed the vandalism from half a block away. Her heart squeezed painfully. No, she gasped, dropping her supplies and sprinting. Andrew, close behind, felt dread twist in his gut. The scene was heartbreaking. Jamal's joyful features now desecrated by thick streaks of black. The once prominent hands shattered into chipped plaster. Ugly words splashed across the mural, dripping in hostility. Danielle nearly buckled at the sight. Tears burning, Andrew roared and slammed his fist against the wall, leaving his knuckles bleeding. How dare they, cowards! Harriet, Jason, Tyrone, Nicole, and others arrived. Their faces registered the same shock and grief, with Tyrone's anger simmering dangerously. Danielle sank to her knees, touching the ruined paint. They couldn't stand to see us proud. Andrew, voice shaking with emotion, turned to the community. We can fix this. We have to. For a moment, only silence answered. Then Harriet nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Jason placed a hand on Danielle's shoulder. Nicole clenched her jaw, eyes blazing. The consensus was clear. The mural had been attacked, but the unity it represented would not crumble. In the face of heartbreak, the entire neighborhood rallied once more. Brush by brush, they repaired what they could, painting over the vile words, patching cracks, restoring Jamal's smile. Margaret showed up again, grim determination on her face, wielding a paintbrush as though it were a sword against hate. One by one, they reclaimed the wall. On that final evening, as the sun dipped low, Danielle and Andrew stood back, gazing at the newly restored masterpiece. The handclasp at the mural's center was bigger, bolder than before. The words glowed with defiance. Harmony isn't about erasing differences. It's about learning to love them. Danielle looked at Andrew, tears in her eyes, but hope burning bright. They can try to destroy our art, our stories, she whispered, but they'll never destroy what's in our hearts. Andrew slipped an arm around her, softly echoing, never. This story isn't just about a wall. It's about the power of courage and hope. If you found it moving, please like and share this video so more people can learn from it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart. And remember, love may not be enough to change the whole world overnight, but it's a powerful spark, one that can ignite the light of unity for communities everywhere.